Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the major increase in outbound Chinese tourists over the last few years and how it's changing the global tourism industry. Let's get back to our panel. And Larry, let's look a little bit at the future here. What is the potential for outbound Chinese tourism? We have the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute, which predicts that overseas trips will reach 400 million by 2030. That's not very far away.
Yes.
400 million, that's a lot of people.
Yes. The consumer interest, the consumer motivations, and the economic development will continue to propel international travel and outbound Chinese travel, and especially when the rising middle class, and to continue to grow. And also, when you look at the current demographics, most of the outbound tourists really originated along the coastal cities of China, in the eastern part and the southern part of
right.
China, and so this will continue to expand to, the interior, and there'll be more people, motivated to travel, and so there are also many other things like the other panelists mentioned. Great culture, great recreation facilities, and great hospitality from those destinations. And the social media is very important in this particular regard. The Chinese just like to share the pictures of the places they go. And they pull out this one app, very popular, called the Meipian, basically meaning big, beautiful pictures. And you can post 99 pictures, you can less than 100, and so it's a big forum that people just share their travel from different places. It's just amazing. As I remember, the country of Morocco got so popular last few years because of some of those pictures.
People sharing pictures.
Oh yes,
right.
yes.
Okay.
And so this will continue, and the demand will be there. And another thing is that when you look at how many Chinese people holding passports, and this very small percentage, the last number I think I came across mentioning it, only 9% of the Chinese population holding a passport. And that's very, very low between, the US citizens, probably like close to 50%. And so more people will travel, and so the economy will provide incentives to go, and the government will continue to facilitate the travel, the facilitation, the easy access from both the Chinese side and also from the host countries,
right.
like a visa, like other welcoming packages.
Yongchen, of course, for the host countries, this is very big for their economies because the Chinese bring with them this enormous spending power. But Yongchen, what do they spend their money on? Is it shopping? Is it experiences? It is visiting tourist sites? What is it that they spend their money on?
I think in general, the large proportion of the expenditure is on shopping. It really depends on which destinations Chinese people traveling to. For instance, if we look at Hong Kong, I would say 70% of the expenditure would be on shopping, on retailing. So that's why the retail industry in Hong Kong is growing so fast because of the Chinese tourists. But if you look at Europe, of course, if you say Paris or maybe London, people still are looking for shopping malls and spend a lot of money on shopping. But if you turn attention to Switzerland, that might be a different picture. Because in Switzerland, Chinese people can spend holidays, I mentioned earlier, especially these ski resorts. These resorts are really, really attractive to Chinese travelers nowadays.
Right. Tom, how much will China drive the tourism industry in Europe in the coming years?
Well, I mean, it's going to become increasingly significant. I think if I could just take up a point made slightly earlier, I think it's very important for Europe, and indeed for every destination, to realize this is not free money. The interesting point about that 400 million outbound Chinese by 2020 is that a huge proportion of that 400 million will be going to Hong Kong and Macau, and the overwhelming majority of that 400 million will be in Asia. That's not to denigrate what they're doing, but it's to point out that Europe, and indeed every destination, long-haul destination from China, has got to match that level of service, welcome and value for money that the visitors expect to receive when they go on holiday. And I think the thing to realize is that every destination learns from its visitors. And I think the one thing that Europe and indeed North America, everywhere, has got to learn is they've got to up their game and they've got to meet the expectations of these Chinese visitors that are arriving.
David, there was a report in a Chinese newspaper, the Global Times, and it reported that the trade dispute that the United States is now having with China is having a negative impact on Chinese tourism to the United States. How big a concern is that for people like you?
Well, I think it's the biggest impact right now is more on business travel and convention and exhibition business. But I think it's a real concern. I mean, the first point here is that the United States and cities like New York and Los Angeles are dream destinations for Chinese people. At the same time, you also have the embassy in China really putting out a travel warning about the dangers of visiting the United States, and including things like the high price of health insurance and being stopped at the border. So this is a real concern. I was hoping that the saber rattling that we see in the trade war would not touch travel, but it does seem to be having an impact.
Larry, what about the domestic impact of all this travel on China itself? Are we seeing a growth, for instance, in infrastructure in China, things like more airports being built?
Yes, there are continued improvement in infrastructure and to accommodate domestic travel, and expansion of the airports and airports built in some regional cities, for instance, and continuing improving the roads and also the high-speed train. The Chinese are very proud of. Has been reaching to many of the destinations. Really opened up opportunities for the domestic Chinese to go to many different places within China. Right. And so that's from the infrastructure perspective.
Okay. Yeah. David, one final point before we close, and that is, we talk about tourism, people traveling across the world, visiting tourist sites, spending money, going shopping, but how much of this contributes to a better understanding of the world, people-to-people exchanges, as we often hear?
That's a fascinating question, and actually one of the reasons I was attracted to this company to begin with was really to see that intercultural exchange. One of the things we are hearing from Chinese tourists, as much as they might want to stay in a four-star hotel, they're also equally intrigued to be staying at an Airbnb or to interview a ranger at a national park to really find out what's going on in the United States, to learn from this incredible economy. And to take back a lot of that culture and learning to their job and to their families back in China.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for another edition of The Heat.